Hi, good morning, everyone. I was introduced, thankfully, to Lenny and Miss Caroline. And so let's get straight into the presentation. We can, next slide, go. This would be the overview of the presentation. The mandate to supervise NGOs, which is ultimately an NPO, the registration process with the FIU, the updating of your registration with the FIU, and your legal obligations under the Money Laundering Terrorism Prevention Act. For short, we will term it as MLTPA. So let's move along. The mandate to supervise NPOs and NGOs is really came down from an international recommendation from the Financial Action Task Force. And it sets out that countries should apply focused and proportionate measures in line with the risk-based approach to such nonprofit organizations to protect them from terrorism financing abuse. And this includes by terrorist organizations posing as legitimate entities, by exploiting legitimate entities as conduits for terrorist financing, including for the purpose of escaping asset freezing measures, and by concealing or obscuring the clandestine diversion of funds intended for legitimate purposes to terrorist organization. Some NPOs may be vulnerable to terrorist financing abuse by terrorists for a variety of reasons. NPOs enjoys the public trust, have access to considerable source of funds, and are often cash intensive. Furthermore, some NPOs have a global presence that provides a framework for national and international operations and financial transactions, often within or near those areas that are most exposed by terrorist activity. In some cases, terrorist organizations have taken advantage of these and other characteristics to infiltrate some NPOs and misuse funds and operations to cover for or support terrorist activities. And due to this, NGOs, ultimately NPOs, are subject to supervision by a supervisory authority. And this is to ensure compliance by yourselves, the entities and NGOs, with requirements to combat money laundering and terrorist financing. And these are all set out in the MLTPA. Next slide, please. So there's an obligation to register your entity with the FIU, and it is essential to effective supervision. Under Section 85B of the MLTPA, it states that a person who intends to carry on or is carrying on a business or profession for which the FIU is specified as a supervisory authority under the third schedule to this act shall apply for registration with the FIU. The registration allows the FIU to be aware of who operates in the sector and provides for better allocation of supervisory resources. And under the third schedule, you would, NGOs and NPOs are listed. And the first schedule assigns them to the FIU, right? So let's move into your requirements for initial registration. There is a prescribed form which the FIU requires NGOs and NPOs to complete. It's called the DNFBP registration form. And many times we know that NGOs are made up of more than one director. And so there's a requirement from a money laundering compliance officer to be elected by your board and submit an application form to the FIU. And that application, both application forms are vetted, your registration and MLCO application forms. We vet them and we approve them separate and apart and provide that approval to you in writing. You will also need to provide us with a copy of proof of your bank deposit of your registration. Registration fees are only done via bank deposit. We do not accept payments here at the office in any other form. All valid IDs are required to be submitted to the FIU for each and every director, for any trustees that an entity may have, and as well as the money laundering compliance officer. Ms. Matut spoke of, and she said that after you've been approved as an NGO, you would be provided a certificate by that ministry. A copy of that certificate is also required in your application to FIU for your registration as a DNFPP. You would also need to present those legal documents Ms. Matut spoke about. To us, copies of them are accepted, and these include your certificate of incorporation, your updated list of directors, and both your articles and memorandum of association. Next slide, please. The registration process takes some time for us to go through. After you've submitted all the required documents, we start our vetting process. It may take up to 10 working days for us to process and approve your application forms and provide you back with the certificate. We want you to note, however, that if your forms or documents are completed, we will follow up with you for additional information or the documentation, mostly via email. And when you present all of those, all the required information, we continue with the processing of the application. We may experience some delays due to incomplete documents or information provided, and we will inform you as such. After we've done the processing and everything and the vetting procedure has been completed, we approve the application and we produce a certificate for your registration with the FIU. And at that point, we will inform you via email or a telephone call that your certificate of registration is ready to be picked up here in the office at the front desk, or for those entities that are out district, we would normally send them via registered mail. Next slide, please. All right. So after you've initially registered with the FIU, every year you're required on your anniversary date that will be printed on your certificate to update your registration with the FIU. The requirements are even simplified at this point because we've received most of your legal documents. So you will only be required to submit a completed DNFBP registration application form, the copy of your proof of deposit of the annual fee, which is $100. I forgot to note that the annual registration fee is $200. Your annual updating of your registration is $100. And then we would also require you to submit an updated list of your directors. This list is, we ask for it to be stamped and certified by the company's registry, the Belize company's registry there in Damopan. The date on the list of directors must be valid within the current year. We find many times when we review the list of directors, we would have that the preparation of the document is dated, for example, 21st June 2019. And then the company registry stamps this July 15, 2020. The FIU will go back to you and ask you to please ensure that the date on your prepared document falls within the year that the document was stamped. So we would prefer, and it's required for you to have that document dated sometime in July, within the new registration year for your entity. And then we also require a confirmation of good standing with the Attorney General's ministry. we either ask you to obtain that certificate from the AG ministry, or we would many times go to the AG ministry ourselves and ask them to confirm whether or not an NGO is in good standing with them. And Samantha went over what it is to be in good standing with the ministry. Just for reiteration of that, you need to have your financials submitted to the ministry as required legally by them in the time course provided. Next slide, please. The FIU would like to highlight and note that your registration information provided to us at the initial or every year in your updating must be notified within due time frame. So registered NGOs and NPOs are required to provide FIU with written notice of any change in information that was required for registration. This notice should specify the date and the details of the change and be provided to us within 14 days of the entity becoming aware of that change. The notice may be provided via a letter or an email or a completed registration form. Our registration forms accommodates for changes in information. And if an entity fails to provide a notice of change to the FIU in your information within that 14 days, it would be considered an offense and is liable on summary conviction to a fine not exceeding 20,000 Belize dollars. Okay, let me cover the type of information you could go back to the former slide, please. The type of information that you would need to advise us that changes may occur would be changes in a director. If you've changed a director, or if you've added directors, removed directors, changes in your address, changes in your email, changes in your phone number, changes in the type of operations you may be doing or conducting under the NGO status, or whether or not you are an NGO, your status is still active, or your status is you decided that we don't want to be an NGO anymore, we'll just revert to just being an NPO. Those are the type of information that if you change it within any time during your year, you need to inform the FIU within 14 days of that change occurring. Next slide, please. If you would allow us, we just want to briefly go over what obligations you have under the Money Laundering Terrorism Prevention Act. And the obligations, we normally call them anti-money laundering and combating the financing of terrorism obligations, short AML-CFT obligations. So NGOs are required to basically meet 5 obligations. We spoke about the first one, appoint a compliance officer. We will ask you that you conduct a risk assessment, take a look at your entity, know who the people are that you are accepting donations and grants from, whether it's local or from international organization. Know the people that you're helping to raise funds for. Know the geographical location of where your grants, your donations are coming from. Things like that you need to consider under your risk assessment. You'll also need to conduct customer due diligence. But in this part, I will tell you that instead of conducting customer due diligence, because NGOs don't necessarily have customers, required to at least conduct due diligence on your donors and those who give you grants. We ask you to also conduct some level of due diligence if your entity has trustees, some level of due diligence on your board of directors or any close affiliates of your NGOs that you may work with. And due diligence would simply mean looking at the course of the transaction you occur, because transactions also include accepting donations and grants. So for you to know what the usual activity of that grantor or donor, and maybe the amount of funds they normally donate to you guys, what they require for you guys to receive the funds, if there are any type of outside activity that that person may be involved with, just to ensure to know that grant or donor, so that in any event they come and act out of normal, then you may be able to detect it within time. Another obligation would be record keeping. We ask that you keep records for all of your grants and donation you receive, for all your financial activities. And the MLTPA requires that you keep your records for a period of no less than 5 years. This is required so that in the event we may need to go in, we may conduct an audit on your NGO, or at any point there is some sort of investigation we have to do or conduct due to a report of a terrorism financing, your records may be able to help the FIU in detecting that and further investigating that occurrence. And then importantly, we find that staff training is imperative in ensuring that the entire process of AML-CFT is met and on a continuum. Most of your staff, if you have a number of staff, as well as your board of directors, are required to know at least what is money laundering, more importantly, what terrorism financing is, and the steps that your organization is taking in order to detect it, to deter it, and also to prevent it. And more importantly, to report it into your money laundering compliance officer.
April, this is Shay. I'm sorry to interrupt. We're running a little bit short on time. So if you're able to finish up in the next minute or so, that would be great.
Yeah, this is wrapping up. This is our final take on it. We just an overview for you guys of what the obligations. If you need any further information on your obligations, the FIU will be, feel free to contact the FIU and we'll be able to expand on that for you guys.